What is poppin' YouTube? Bringing you 5 wide receivers skyrocketing up Dynasty rankings, starting it off with Drizzy Drake London, who, to no surprise, has skyrocketed it up Dynasty rankings because of Kirk Cousins. And now, everything that we like about Drake London, we like about Drake London. But of course, when we talked about Drake London, we talked about this Atlanta Falcons offense without a quarterback. It was a little dire. All of a sudden, we get Kirk Cousins in this offense, and all of a sudden, Drake London rises 11 wide receiver spots, goes from wide receiver 21 to wide receiver 10 in Dynasty Fantasy Football. Now, I never like to buy at the absolute peak, and maybe Drizzy Drake has top 5 upside. Maybe he has top 10 upside, but the fact is he's sitting here at wide receiver 10. So if we're saying he has top 10 upside and he's already there, it's probably time to sell. But when we're talking about A.J. Brown, Chris Olave, guys around him, there are some good options if you decide to, of course, trade into another asset. But like last year, 109 targets and absolutely one of, the bottom 3 passing attacks in the NFL. So wide receiver 24, even though his team absolutely sucked at throwing the ball. And my favorite stat about Drake London is when he's facing these cornerbacks, he is averaging his 2 first seasons in the NFL. The average cushion on him is in top 10 wide receivers. So cornerbacks are really playing off him. They're not pressing him. They're giving him a ton of cushion, probably because they know he really can't beat him over the middle. So they like to come hard down on him because he's a bigger wide receiver. But Drizzy Drake, like I said, only 22 years old, skyrocketing up Dynasty rankings. For me personally, I don't have him as high as what Keep Trade Cut currently has him, but he still has gotten boosted in my rankings. So he's skyrocketing up my rankings. I want to know what you guys think of Drizzy Drake's ascension in the Dynasty rankings. We move to our next guy, and it is Odunze, who is up 7 spots in the Dynasty rankings, all the way up to wide receiver 15. Now, these rookie wide receivers, whether it's Marvin Harrison Jr., whether it's Malik Neighbors, whether it's Rome, these guys are getting valued so highly because we've seen how important these young wide receivers are for overall Dynasty roster growth, also how quickly they can produce in the NFL. Now, Odunze is being projected in the top 7 picks of the NFL draft, so we're actually going to have to see how that ends up playing and taking into effect. But Odunze skyrocketing up Dynasty rankings. Honestly, nothing has changed since the NFL Combine. I know you could attribute some of that, but I think really this rookie hype, this rookie fever is getting to Odunze, so that's why he's skyrocketing up Dynasty rankings. So shout out to you. It's making those top 6 picks even more valuable than they already were. Odunze, second guy, player skyrocketing up Dynasty rankings. My third player skyrocketing up Dynasty rankings is going to be T. Higgins. And T. Higgins is at wide receiver 20, up 5 spots over the last 15 days to wide receiver 20 from wide receiver 25. Now, T. Higgins gets tagged to the Cincinnati Bengals. There's all these rumors. Are the Cincinnati Bengals looking to trade T. Higgins because they don't want to pay him the bag? I'm a Bengals fan. We'd love to pay T. Higgins the bag, but we're giving the bag to Joe Burrow, giving the bag to Jamar Chase. You have salary cap limitations at this point in the NFL spectrum. I just think whatever happens with T. Higgins, whether he is on the Buffalo Bills, whether he does go to another team where he can be the alpha level wide receiver, or whether he stays as wide receiver 2 on the Cincinnati Bengals, makes it well known and kind of puts T. Higgins at ease in a lot of our minds. Now, T. Higgins, of course, can he stay healthy? That's the big question about T. Higgins, because wide receiver 12 points per game in 2021, wide receiver 26 on points per game in 2022, and then 2023, 11.5 fantasy points per game. Wide receiver 40 only played in 12 games, so he was battling that injury bug, but 6'4", 216, 25 years old. T. Higgins is rising up in rankings for the very fact that he has that athletic alpha level type build that we look for in these elite dominant type wide receivers. Now, can he get more than 76 targets like he had this last year because he was injured? Hopefully, because I think he has the 130 to 140 target range. He's never had more than 111 targets in a season. If he can even get to 120, 125 targets and stay healthy, I think we're talking about T. Higgins as an absolute value right now in Dynasty Fantasy Football. I just think the injury bug has been the biggest thing keeping T. Higgins down. So let me know what you think of T. Higgins. I know a lot of people are pro T. Higgins, a lot of people are anti-T. Higgins. I think he's rising up my rankings, so let me know down in the comments below. My next wide receiver that's skyrocketing up the rankings is going to be Mr. George Pickens. And we all know why George Pickens is skyrocketing up the rankings. We got Mr. Target Hog Deontay Johnson added down, so we no longer have to have the Twitter debates. Who's the alpha? Is it Deontay Johnson? Is it George Pickens? And then plus you get Russell Wilson and Justin Fields as the quarterback upgrade for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, George Pickens, 12.3 fantasy points per game this last year, wide receiver for 36, 17 games, 106 targets, 63 receptions. When we go down to the metrics, snap share, wide receiver 13, wide receiver 1 on route participation, which meant anytime he they were running routes. That man was out there. Wide receiver 18 on air yards, wide receiver 15 on air yard share, wide receiver 10 on deep targets. That is huge because Justin Fields and Russell Wilson both throw a really great deep ball, which is going to be great for George Pickens. And he was actually wide receiver 1 on yards per reception. So a lot of these stats that we like to look at with George Pickens, my man's an absolute alpha level wide receiver. So every reason for him to be actually going up and skyrocketing up the rankings. Now, me personally, I think the Pittsburgh Steelers will definitely be taking a wide receiver in this NFL draft. They have plenty of draft capital. My biggest worry for George Pickens is Russell Wilson and Justin Fields going to be able to provide the value that's going to be needed to sustain George Pickens' continued dynasty growth and the reason that he's skyrocketing? Honestly, right now, I'm trying to get out of George Pickens because I don't believe he's that guy. But if you believed out of school, out of the University of Georgia, that the ACL tear caused him to not be the wide receiver 1 of his class and honestly kind of slip down into the second round, and then of course he is that dude, then of course you could definitely continue to buy into him or have him or hold him, however you want to look at it. For me personally, I'm looking to sell if I have any George Pickens shares, which I don't have a ton, but this is the perfect opportunity because he is skyrocketing up Dynasty Fantasy Football rankings. My 5th wide receiver skyrocketing up Dynasty Fantasy Football rankings is going to be Hollywood Brown, who is up 30 tier. Shout out to the Chiefs bump that happened to Mr. Hollywood Brown. And if you've been following the career arc and career trajectory of Hollywood Brown, a lot of people were excited about him. Of course, cousin to Antonio Brown. A lot of hope that he could kind of turn into that same type of player. And over his NFL career, wide receiver 49, wide receiver 43, wide receiver 21, wide receiver 27, wide receiver 49 on a points per game basis. So it really hasn't happened up to this point. And when we're talking about all those numbers, we're talking about high target shares, 100 targets, 145 targets, 107 targets, 101 targets. So yes, there's been a little bit of health concerns the last 2 years, but really his target share has been absolutely incredible. And he hasn't been able to produce on a fantasy points per game level. So that is a major concern. Now, of course, you get the bump of, cool, put him on the Kansas City Chiefs offense. I mean, right now he is probably the second most talented wide receiver after Rashee Rice in that offense. And I wouldn't be surprised if they go get another wide receiver because it's very clear, as much as the Chiefs, they're absolutely winning Super Bowls without Tyreek Hill. Travis Kelce's getting up there in age, so they're definitely going to have to replenish these weapons around Patrick Mahomes. So if I have Hollywood Brown, I might be looking to sell. The nice little Kansas City Chiefs Patrick Mahomes boost. Yes, I just don't see how he's going to be able to finish that value on his keep trade cut value right now when I can get into a very similar asset, maybe tier up, add him to a player. There's a lot of things that you can do with Hollywood Brown, but he is skyrocketing up dynasty rankings. And when a player like this skyrockets, there's some times where it's like, okay, he's kind of readjusting, skyrocketing to where I think he should be valued. When I look at Hollywood Brown, I think this is a little bit too rich for my personal taste to take on Hollywood Brown. And my last and final player that is skyrocketing up dynasty rankings is Ladd McConkey. And Ladd McConkey is up 35 spots on keep trade cut. And when we look at Ladd McConkey, I think a lot of it is having to do with a lot of these rookie wide receivers are getting pushed up the draft board, and these kind of middling guys, the guys afterwards, the Xavier Worthies, the A.D. Mitchells, the Ladd McConkeys are getting pushed up the overall draft board, which is then pushing them up the dynasty rankings when we're considering if Ladd McConkey gets back end first draft capital, what that will do for his overall dynasty fantasy football value. But like I said, right now, when you're looking at Ladd McConkey, where's he going to land where he's going to absolutely flourish and thrive? Ladd McConkey right now is really helping your 110, 111, 112 picks, just continuing to gain value. And while I'm definitely, if I have those picks, not trading until I'm on the clock, Ladd McConkey's player overall 102. So when we're looking at guys around him, Christian Watson, Javonte Williams, David Montgomery, David Njoku, Joe Mixon, Chris Godwin. I mean, you got Deontay Johnson ahead of him, Calvin Ridley behind him, A.D. Mitchell. I understand the enticing part of Ladd McConkey. When you watch the way that he runs routes, when you watch the way that he wins, we also saw him run a super fast combine 40-yard dash. I understand. It makes a lot of sense on why people would be in on Ladd McConkey. But when we see guys of his caliber, of course, we're seeing more slot wide receivers like the Cooper Kupps, like the Hunter Renfros, being able to continue to win on the inside for you and really help your overall fantasy football value. But then that boosts your dynasty fantasy football value. I'm just not in 100% on Ladd McConkey rising up, skyrocketing up the rankings, but he definitely is skyrocketing right now in Dynasty Fantasy Football Circle. So let me know what you think of these wide receivers down below. Putting out a ton of content before the NFL draft, helping you guys become better Dynasty Fantasy Football players, talking about the market, talking about strategy, talking about trends. So let me know what type of videos you would like to see down below. Also hit the like button and that subscribe button if you haven't already. On the way to 2,000 subs. Appreciate you guys so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.